These are some buy low options for your fantasy football teams. As we get closer to playoff time, it's time to get our teams in playoff shape. So let's start with Tyron Tracy. And when you're looking at how these guys split snaps between Tyron Tracy and Devin Singletary today in Devin Singletary's first game back, you are very encouraged. And yes, they are going to ease back in Devin Singletary. And I don't think the snap count's going to look like this every week. But when you're looking at the running back usage, if we could put the chart up here, Tyron Tracy dominated this backfield. In a game where the Giants offense looked really bad, Daniel Jones could do nothing. Tyron Tracy, even though he was getting the majority of the snaps, only had like 6 carries today for 23 yards. He had 3 targets, 3 receptions, which is encouraging to see. But the main thing is this week during practice, you've had Brian Dable come out and basically say that Tyron Tracy, although Singletary was coming back, was still going to get a very large share of the workload, if not half and half, maybe more. And I think what you saw this week is they are very comfortable giving Tracy that role, even when it does amount to them not using him. When you're looking at the snaps for this game, 39-12. Tracy over Singletary. Routes run 27-6. What this is telling me is that even when Devin Singletary does come back, I think they're showing a level of comfort with Tyron Tracy as their receiving back that I hadn't really seen before. And yeah, he did have 6 targets and 6 receptions last week, but every game before that, he had 3 or less targets. He did have 3 targets again today for 3 receptions. And I think this is pretty good news for Tyron Tracy in terms of his rest of season outlook. The one big case for not buying Tyron Tracy is he's in a terrible offense. And really what I have noticed this season, and what you should notice every single fantasy football season, is buying running backs in bad offenses is usually not a very good idea. The main appeal to buying Tyron Tracy right now, when you're looking at what his current price is in fantasy football, he's actually still pretty cheap. Even coming into today's game, he was still the 34th ranked running back rest of season, according to expert consensus on flockfantasy.com. So he's going next to Rachaad White. Like, if you can trade away Rachaad White and get Tyron Tracy, I will take my shot on Tyron Tracy. Isaiah Pacheco, Austin Eckler, Zach Moss, any of those guys. Like, I feel like the upside is at least there in terms of the type of player that Tyron Tracy is, and the receiving upside, just the amount of volume that he could potentially get. And while I don't think Devin Singletary is dead, I do want to emphasize that. I think Devin Singletary could easily come back here and have some kind of impact, if not as much of an impact as he had in some of the games earlier this season. I do think that Tyron Tracy as a talent is comparable, if not better, than Devin Singletary. And I think the Giants realize that. And if the Giants are smart, which I think, Brian Dable offensively can be a pretty good coach, I think they will try to get him involved as a playmaker because he's versatile, because he has receiving upside, and because he does make their offense slightly better. So not every game is going to be like today's game, and I do think the volume is what we're going to be looking for when you're buying Tyron Tracy. You're seeing that here. You saw it in today's game. So it makes me really comfortable sending some trades for him in our fantasy football leagues moving forward.
Yeah, we're also looking at the volume and opportunity overall for a guy like Jordan Addison. When you're looking at the Minnesota Vikings offense and their situations, with all the wide receivers there, obviously Aaron Jones coming back healthy this game. It's been a couple of weeks, but with Addison, he of course is as expected right behind JJ with 51 total snaps, 33 routes run, 4 targets to JJ's 8. And when you're looking at the production here today in a game where they just lost to Detroit, it was a really entertaining game, a fun one to watch. But at the end of the day, JJ, who is just hilariously consistent, who would have thought, had another 8 target, 7 reception, 81 yard and a touchdown day. And Jordan Addison kind of just had a classic Jordan Addison non-touchdown day, right, where he only had 8 points. But again, in half PPR formats, only 8 points isn't that bad. He had 4 targets, 3 receptions for 66 yards. So you're looking at that usage in half PPR formats, and you're like, okay, with his snaps and with his opportunity in this situation, I can live with that when Sam Darnold is throwing the ball roughly 30 times a game. Because let's be honest, Aaron Jones, as good as Aaron Jones is, number one, he has already suffered from an injury and missed a game this season. He is now struggling with a hamstring injury, and I'm not saying that's going to last forever or go the entire season and he's not going to be good. That's not what I'm saying. Just expect some volatility here and there. And I mean, talk about volatility. Aaron Jones had, I think, half of his production came from one breakaway run. That was like a 40-yard run. It was a touchdown. And then the rest of the day, he honestly was pretty mediocre. So when you're looking at that production, again, like the game before, he had a 5-point game. He's had a 7-point game in the past. The point with Aaron Jones is that Look, just like Jordan Addison, you're going to see some boom bust games, and I think it's just at this point baked into Jordan Addison's price. And I'm willing to take a shot on him when, yes, he's kind of been getting his feet under him since he came back from the ankle injury. He's had, since he came back healthy in the Green Bay game, 4 targets, ended up scoring 21 points off those 4 targets. Then he had an 8-target game against the Jets, a tough secondary, and then they come off the bye, 4 targets against Detroit. So it is a little bit unknown how much opportunity he is going to get on a weekly basis. What I do know is that Jordan Addison is a really good wide receiver too on a really good, extremely effective offense where Sam Darnold is providing plenty of volume for him to be productive. Not to mention, you also have TJ Hawkinson coming back healthy. And I think some people would say, well, that constitutes Jordan Addison being a seller. That constitutes Jordan Addison being a hold at best. I understand that argument. I'm a huge Hawkinson truther, but you've also seen in the past what Jordan Addison and J. Jeff have been capable of doing on the field with Hawkinson on the field as well. A lot of Addison's touchdown upside came when Hawkinson was on the field. So just keep that in mind. I think it's a nice shot to take, and he's incredibly affordable right now. You're not going to have to pay much to go out there and get Addison, and I think his week-to-week upside is pretty dang solid when you can plug him in your flex and hope that he scores 20. If he doesn't, with his target volume and opportunity, he's going to get you a floor of like 7 to 10 points.
It's time to get our teams playoff ready, and that includes making moves that will solidify your team as a true contender in your fantasy leagues and also give you a legitimate shot to win your fantasy playoffs. What we're doing right now is we're reviewing people's teams, and we're telling them who specifically they should be trading away, who they should be trading for, how their position groups look, who they should be targeting on waivers, what they should do to make sure that their team is playoff ready. We can do a team blueprint for you. It looks like this. Very good-looking graphic that comes with the team analysis that Nathan and I do personally for your team. You can get that at the link in the pinned comment. Links in the description. You can get it at flockfantasy.com/domain. Best way to do it is get the annual Mother Flocker tier. This is going to get you all the tools you need for fantasy football going into the playoffs, including all of our rankings, which will be very helpful. The trade calculator, the My Team's power rankings. You can see where your team stacks up going into the playoffs, and you can get a free team blueprint with the annual Mother Flocker tier when you use code domain. So we'd love to do a team blueprint and break down your team, but let's get back to the video. Now let's talk about Tank Bigsby. I think a lot of people are already going to be trying to buy Tank Bigsby after what they saw in London. Obviously, Tank was very, very good this week. 26 carries for 118 yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, the main concern with Tank Bigsby as a buy, there really are 2 concerns here that make me a little bit hesitant to buy him. Number one, he is in a bad offense and one of the worst teams in the NFL. But number 2, they literally will not use him in the receiving game at all. So his floor is going to be pretty low. There are really, you're seeing 2 kind of polar opposite forces here. The force that's pulling for Tank Bigsby is the fact that he is the best running back on the Jaguars right now, and I don't think it's particularly close. He looks significantly better, in my opinion, than he did in college and in his rookie year. He's come out and he has been very good as a runner on the ground, but you have to understand coming into today's game, 26 attempts for 118 yards against a defense that was allowing the 5th most fantasy points to running backs coming into today's game, which probably went up today because he had 28 points, obviously in full point PPR leagues. This was not 28 points, sorry, 25 points. This was a very good game for him. I do want to stress that if anybody is trying to sell really high on Tank Bigsby, I don't think this is somebody that you can expect to get plugged in and also have a high floor because, again, he has 2 targets on the entire year. And so that's really low floor you're talking about. The best type of team that can buy Tank Bigsby are the teams that have been either hounded by injuries, and at this point, what Tank Bigsby is he is potentially, in my opinion, a lead back, somebody who's going to get the volume. Again, he got the ball 26 times today. I expect him to get 15 or more carries the rest of the season. Yes, ETN's going to come back and get used in the receiving game, and also they're going to give him carries. Wouldn't surprise me if ETN started. But in my opinion, I think Tank Bigsby has earned at least a shot at the starting job here, and I bet they're going to give him that given how good he played this week. And so basically what you're betting on by trading for Tank Bigsby in your fantasy leagues is you're betting that he is going to be somebody who is getting the volume to where he's going to have touchdown upside every week, right? Because a lot of our fantasy teams had guys like Christian McCaffrey, Isaiah Pacheco. A lot of them had some guys that are still playing, but ended up not really producing, like Zach Moss. So you drafted guys like that. Really what you're looking for, because when you're searching for guys this cheap, you're either getting guys that come in and have an exclusive receiving role. You're talking about guys like on the flip side of this, Dearness Johnson. Johnson wasn't not productive today. He had 10 points, but he was the receiving back. Bigsby had so many more points because he scored 2 touchdowns, right? And because he was really efficient on the ground with a lot of carries. It was all about volume and touchdown upside. And so I think Tank Bigsby is a really good buy for teams who are in search of somebody who just gets volume, because obviously running backs that get the volume that are actually getting receiving upside are going to be really expensive. And Tank Bigsby, again, the main appeal for him is he's going to be really cheap. And I think a lot of us are looking for last-ditch efforts to fix our fantasy teams because we drafted some bad guys. And so Tank Bigsby, again, if somebody's trying to sell high on him, or if you've got a bidding war going on in your league, I'm not a huge fan of like overpaying for Tank Bigsby, because again, I do think that there is a fair amount of risk that comes with buying a running back in a bad offense with a floor of 0. And also in an offense where you basically have had 3 guys there and it's not getting any better, because Johnson is a factor there. So between ETN, Johnson, and Bigsby, it does make me a little bit uneasy. But again, a lot of times this is what you need. A lot of times these are the guys you need. You need guys that have potential running back 1 in their own team upside, like Tank Bigsby, like Tyron Tracy, and you need to go get those guys in hopes that they get enough volume to start scoring some touchdowns later in the season so that you can hit at the right time for your fantasy team. So with Tank, again, I'm not sure that this is going to continue in terms of 26 carries, but I do think that they're going to give him the majority of the red zone carries at the very minimum, and that's going to make him, in my opinion, at the very least, he's going to be flexible in most weeks moving forward in fantasy football. I certainly will be considering flexing him on my own fantasy football team, just because I do think that most touchdowns that the Jags are going to be scoring are not going to be coming from Trevor Lawrence at this point. I would take my bet on Tank Bigsby scoring a fair amount of touchdowns rest of season. So I think he's a fairly decent target for your fantasy teams.
We've spent so much time, we've dedicated so much time to talking about all these different players on the Atlanta Falcons offense over the past few weeks, because it's just been such a polarizing situation. But what is objectively clear is that Kirk Cousins' volume is no joke on a consistent basis. And it is enough to help multiple receiving assets on top of Bijan Robinson's production to be productive and have high-end productive weeks pretty consistently. And this week it happened to be Drake London, who is going to be that #1 guy consistently for the rest of the season. He's wide receiver 5 right now, Nux. And then Kyle Pitts also had a solid day, 9 targets, 7 receptions for 65 yards, depending on what your format you're in. He had like
Nux again, because remember we made that video and we said that Kyle Pitts, he was on our breakout video because we're like, we think he's actually going to do better rest of the season. Yeah. And he has done better rest of the season so far.
Yeah,
so far, so good.
Yeah, he has looked pretty good. But he also is one of those guys that is relatively inconsistent on the offense, and I would expect that to happen for the rest of the season. He's just demonstrated that for so long, and I would expect that to continue while Bijan is really starting to come into his own, starting to get a lot of those goal line opportunities in the red zone, and had like 15, 21 carries the last couple of weeks. What I do know for sure is that Darnell Mooney, in my opinion, is like the perfect option for Kirk Cousins to just chuck the ball down the field, because he's demonstrated it in the past over the first 6 weeks of the season. And it was just the Tampa Bay game where he had 27 points, 16 targets, 9 receptions, 105 yards, 2 touchdowns. Everyone remembers that game. It was incredibly entertaining, a lot of fun to watch. Last couple weeks, not so much. Against Carolina, he only drops 5.5 points. Seattle only drops 7 points. But when you look at his target volume there, he's had 5 and 8 targets respectively, and that is very, very nice for a guy who has been labeled as an exclusive deep threat who is big play dependent. And while he does have big play capability, I think he's demonstrated that he is not big play dependent. When he isn't having all of these crazy breakaway runs or breakaway touchdowns, he still has a pretty solid floor. And again, a floor of 5 to 7 points, it sucks if you're flexing it. It's not going to win you a matchup, but it also isn't going to entirely screw you, because you're not depending on Darnell Mooney on a weekly basis anyways, right? He is a flex option. Most of the buys we talk about are flex options in these videos. But look, he is directly behind Drake London in total snaps, had the same amount of routes run, and he had just 1 less target than Drake London. Again, any given week, you turn some of those targets into a potential touchdown or just bigger plays overall, you're going to see better weeks from the Atlanta Falcons than the game that they struggled in against the Seattle Seahawks. And I think Darnell Mooney is going to be on the up. You're probably going to be able to get him as a pretty solid discount at the moment, and even get him as a throw-in deals for bigger guys.
So coming into this week, Alvin Kamara was still the running back 1 in full point PPR leagues. And a lot of people are going to be like, okay, why are you putting him on a buys video? How are you going to be able to buy somebody this expensive? And I think a lot of people have looked at a couple things for Alvin Kamara and been a little bit concerned. Number one, obviously the dwindling production. He started off the season on a tear, 22, 44, 15, 24 points. Since then, he's had games of 12, 17, and 8 points. And when you're looking at some of the metrics that are relevant from a fantasy perspective for Alvin Kamara, the touchdowns have been hit or miss. He had a touchdown in week 6, he had a touchdown in week 4, he had touchdowns in week 1 and 2, as well as, and he had 4 touchdowns against Dallas. So the touchdowns have been relatively like 1 every other game or so, which is typical for a running back like him. What you have seen also decline with his production are his carries. Against Kansas City, 11 carries. Keep in mind, Kansas City is a very tough matchup for running backs from a fantasy perspective. Tampa Bay, 13 carries. Keep in mind, that game was a complete shootout. Like, from the first half, got up 24 to something, and then the Saints game all the way back. Like, they were throwing the ball. And then against Denver, and obviously the Denver game was fairly ugly. One of the worst games I've ever seen in my life, and got 7 carries in that game.
Did you watch it?
I did watch some of it, yeah. I said I wasn't going to.
You said you weren't going to.
Well, I'm too much of a freaking degenerate. But 7 carries. And again, anybody who watched that game, you had obviously they losing Derek Carr, and that's the other factor. The third factor is that people are projecting this offense to get significantly worse. You've lost Rashid Shaheed, you lost Derek Carr, and Chris Olave is currently out. Yeah. So people are looking at these 3 factors, and I think they're like, with Kamara, I'm not quite sure. He requested a trade. We don't know what's going on there. He doesn't look happy. He told Sean Payton, come get me. But I don't know if he did say that or not. But people are looking at those 3 things and freaking out about Kamara. There is one more statistic that I'd like to talk about. And to me, this is the most important statistic in terms of determining whether or not I want to buy a running back like Alvin Kamara. Do you know what that statistic is?
Probably has to do with receiving upside.
It does, actually. It's
no
targets.
Way. No
yeah,
way.
I know. Really
total shot in the dark because it had
know.
to do with Alvin Kamara.
Right.
But
and with Alvin Kamara, everybody knows that Alvin Kamara is one of the best combo receiving and rushing backs. Fantasy football backs, maybe one of the best ever. Like, legit. He is one of the most consistent running backs for fantasy of our generation, period. And so when I'm looking at Alvin Kamara, here's what I see. I saw in the first 3 weeks where he went off, he had 5, 3, and 3 targets. And what I've seen since then is 9, 8, 8, and 7 targets. Still getting 7 targets in a game where he only gets 7 carries this week against Denver. And he caught 6 of those. The dude's floor is 8.4 points in full point PPR leagues because that's what he scored last week. You saw Alvin Kamara perform at his floor essentially with pretty much zero touchdown upside last week. He only had 14 yards on his receptions, broke none of them. The Denver Broncos were all over that. He had 10 yards on 7 attempts. He was as inefficient from a yard standpoint as you can get.
This is his floor because Olave's not on the field.
This is his floor.
Yeah.
So I think this week you're going to have some antsy managers, especially antsy managers that are now falling to 2 and 5.
Yeah.
That are going to be like, Kamara did me really well early in the season. I didn't get enough wins from him, though, and now he's fallen off, and that situation's way worse. Yep. And if you have people that are panicking on Alvin Kamara, again, maybe they won't. And rest of the season, right now, he's the consensus running back 5 from an expert perspective on Flock Fantasy. He is my current rest of season running back 3 before this week. Honestly, I probably won't have him at 3 after this week, but it doesn't mean I'm not still going to go try to buy him where I can. And I think you should be trading for Alvin Kamara because, again, the offense obviously started way better than it has been. But Derek Carr, do you know how long Derek Carr is supposed to be out?
Longer than they initially expected, I believe. I think it's going to be like
different things.
I thought it was like 4 or 5 weeks.
Could soon return to practice. Long shot to play in week 8. So it
so
could
not
be
4 or
within
5 weeks.
It could
so
be
three,
within
3 to 4 weeks.
Yeah.
Okay.
So even that, like, the situation really can only get better from here. I don't know if they start Spencer Rattler again. Honestly, who is their third string? I can't even freaking remember.
I watched Jake Haener.
Thank you.
Rattler was not. He's not atrocious.
Yeah, it just wasn't a competitive game against Denver, so I wonder if they're going to try something else.
Yeah, we'll see.
But with that being said, I think the situation can only get better. And we've already seen him produce in less than ideal situational games. Like, again, when you're looking at his game log, he has produced at times where you wouldn't really expect him to produce at a high level, and he did. I mean, playing Atlanta's defense is pretty freaking good. He was productive against Tampa Bay and Kansas City. He obviously dropped 44 on Dallas, and Dallas' defenses ended up sucking. So that's been a storyline this season. But I think this is his floor. And so with Kamara, if you have anybody panicking, if you have anybody with any sort of doubt, Kamara is a guy that I think you could, if you have the resources to go get him, I think he's a good guy to add to your fantasy teams because I think he's got league-winning upside. Playoff schedule, Week 14, they play the Giants. Week 15, they play the Commanders. 16, the Green Bay Packers. 17, the Raiders. That is a pretty, in my opinion, that's a favorable schedule for playoffs.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
So for that reason alone, you can go buy him.
There are a lot of hard truths that we've had to swallow with the Las Vegas Raiders this year. Very few of them, again, have been really fun to look at on the field, that being Minshew and Aiden O'Connell and Devontae Adams not wanting to play for the team. There's a couple positive things that we've pulled away from this situation in Vegas, and that is Brock Bowers is so freaking good. He is so good. And number two is that Alexander Madison is the unquestioned running back one there who actually has some pretty decent productive upside. When you're looking at his usage, and again, you're going to hear so many people tell you in the fantasy community, a bunch of other people are going to say, oh, you can't ever invest in running backs in bad offenses. But more than freaking half the league is a bad team and a bad offense right now, is what it feels like. And running backs are pretty tough to get your hands on right now with all the injuries. So you get production where you can, and right now you're getting production in Las Vegas, and it's gross. But Alexander Madison had a pretty efficient game today against, granted, the LA Rams, who don't have, the best defense of all time, but I really care more about the volume. Him getting all of the goal line carries, a large majority of the early down work, significant majority of total snaps. The short yardage was his. Third downs he split between it was between him and Amir Abdullah, but again, any third down opportunities that were like short yardage or goal line situations, he was getting those opportunities. Like Zamir White, again, totally out of the question here. He's not even in the equation. Alexander Madison coming off of a 13.8 point game. He had 23 carries for 92 yards today. And yeah, his receiving usage is actually decently serviceable. When you're looking at him the last 3 weeks, he's had 11.5, 6.4, and 10.3 yards per reception. And when he's gotten decent receiving usage in the other two games this year against the Chargers and Carolina, he had 10.7 and 12.3. That is right around the range, again, on an average yards per target perspective. Like, that's what's keeping him on the field. That is why he is the Raiders' most effective running back, is he is very effective as a dump-off option for the below-average quarterback play that the Raiders have to settle with for the rest of the season. He gives them the best possible option at the running back position. He just does. And you're seeing that demonstrated in the carries. The last 3 weeks, they know who their guy is. Two tough defenses against Denver and Pittsburgh. He still gets 15 and 14 carries. No, he wasn't efficient. Madison isn't going to be your most efficient running back. I don't care about efficiency. I care about the volume and where that volume is on the field. And Madison is getting it to a point where you know that every given week he has the upside to be a very, very solid week-winning flex option for you where he can score 15, 20 points at any time.
It's not like he doesn't have any receiving upside either. Like when you're looking at his receiving production in the last 3 weeks, 5 points, 8 points, and 6 points. So like it's establishing a pretty high floor actually for Madison. And when you're watching the game, I mean,
he's efficient and he's getting the usage.
And I mean, honestly, they kept flashing up during the Raiders game today. Like the targets by positions, they were doing wide receiver and tight end. Obviously, tight end was dominating because they just target Brock Bowers all the time. And then the running back. And without Jacoby Myers, I think he's going to have it skewed.
Well, Myers coming back, I think is just going to open the field up for Madison even more.
No, I think it will too. I mean, he makes their offense better for sure. Yeah. And honestly, like, they had Aiden O'Connell go out today, but the offense doesn't project super well rest of the season, but they are, 23 carries, like after 15 and 14. But again, it's not like he's a little bit different than somebody like Tank Bixby because he's actually getting he's getting targets and he's actually catching them. So, and these are all guys, again, like it's going to be situational. It's going to depend on what type of team you have, how your team is doing. Hopefully your team is doing very well. But they're all good buy candidates for your fantasy football team. So do us a huge favor, drop a like, make sure you are subscribed if you play fantasy football. Subscribing really helps us out and it helps us grow the channel. So we appreciate it if you did that. If you enjoyed the video, and also flockfantasy.com/domain to use the My Teams tool and to also be able to get a team review if you need a team blueprint. Again, what moves should you make for your fantasy football team to help you win your league this year? That's what we're helping you. So like I said, flockfantasy.com/domain. Appreciate you guys. We'll see you later.